You got players transferring to Purdue that we haven't really talked about yet. 3 in total from Indiana to Purdue on the football side of things, which I have a hard time with players being able now to go to another in-conference team and play against you immediately, just from a systematic standpoint, strategic standpoint. That's a lot of information that's going to be traveling over there. And, whether they transfer there or not, being able to play immediately, I think, no. I say, nope, cannot play immediately if you transfer in conference. But that's just my take on that.
It's a tough one. I've always kind of erred on the side of player freedom, whether it was NIL stuff, transfer rights. As a general rule, the party that writes the contract should have the contract construed against them because they had the power to begin with. And players are massively at a disadvantage when it comes to their rights and responsibilities under what's effectively their contract with the university, their scholarship agreements. It's certainly been a jarring transition into the portal era and the NIL era. But this is one of those where I think maybe it would probably be wise to take a look at, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of tactical, there's a lot of strategic disadvantage that can take place when you've got guys sniping players from conference rivals. In this case, from in-state rivals. As we were talking before the break, this is one of the most significant games on both teams' calendars every single year. Often it's going to decide one team's fate, whether they become bowl eligible or what bowl they land in, and there's significant ramifications to that outcome. And there is a ton of information tactically that those players possess that they then can share with their new teams, and put you at a massive disadvantage. If you have to redesign your entire play calling structure so that it can't be easily intercepted, it's a tough one. And I don't know that it's an easy answer to figure out, how restrictive you want to get there. But if you're going to go in conference, maybe, sitting out a year isn't overly punitive or restrictive on either side. But it's one that I imagine you're going to see accelerate in the coming years and become increasingly problematic. So I wouldn't be surprised if conferences get out in front of that sooner than later.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's especially a guy like Reese Taylor that's been in the system for 4 years or 3 years, however long it's been. It feels like it's only been a year, but you just know so much about total schemes. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, he's been playing with Tywan Mullins since they got there, and okay, this is his strength, this is his weakness, that's our best corner. So he's probably going to be on an island by himself a lot, and you're able to just pass information to new teammates. But I think the hardest part for me about understanding a move like Reese Taylor's is you've played in this game, you chose Indiana, you got recruited by Purdue too, you chose Indiana. You're part of an in-state rivalry, and maybe it doesn't go as deep as it does for someone like me, but when you've been on campus for 4 years, this is what you talk about. You've got someone like Mark Deal in the building every year that is reminding you how terrible Purdue is every day. And then to just kind of say, oh, well, I'm leaving Indiana and committing to Purdue, and it being leaked that you were committing to Purdue before you even left, I just thought it was very interesting for him, for how the portal itself is operating. I just really didn't like the move. Not that I don't respect it, but it just is. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it was disappointing more than anything. I think about the state of college football, and then also for the rivalry itself.
Yeah, and then you look at Samson James, someone who originally committed to Ohio State, flips to Indiana, plays, goes into the transfer portal, back out of the transfer portal, and then transfers to your rival. That one, it just seems like he was never committed to Indiana.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. I get it. If it's your first year and you're not playing and it's not what you thought it would be, okay, great. But to have you can transfer after 3 years, where you haven't graduated. I get the grad transfer. You can put together a pretty convincing argument that you're going to get a grad degree. Okay, whatever. But to transfer after 2 or 3 years, like, you know what this is. You know what's been happening. You made the decision to stay here. Now tough it out. I totally don't agree with kind of how the transfer portal has, we talked about it earlier, 2,000 people in it, which is a fifth of active scholarship players in the FBS. I just don't, it doesn't make sense to me how that is sustainable and what it really teaches anybody about anything. I mean, it's still amateur athletics. Like, what are we talking about here?
The thing is, Chronic, there's no way to go back. I don't think they can go back. The NCAA has shown that they really just want to wash their hands of basically almost everything. They don't want to track down and chase the rule breakers, because they haven't done a very good job of that. Now you've got all this going on, NIL on top of that, and it's just like they're washing their hands of it, because there are already some parameters, rules in place that are, to me, are just being totally ignored as it is. And I keep using the Texas example for NIL for incoming offensive linemen. Any incoming lineman is getting a 50 grand. Well, that's not how it was set up. It's name, image, likeness was for a name of a person, not a to be determined TBD. It's not, the name can't be TBD, and that's an inducement. So that is already going against how it's been set up. So they've already just kind of washed their hands of it, and I'm afraid of where it's going to end up.
Well, I think what's particularly revealing about it is you look at the absurdities that have mutated in just a couple of months. Also recognizing, this has been happening illicitly for decades. The pay to play is nothing new. We just brought it above board. Now, instead of the boosters having to employ bagmen, they get to stand next to their prizes and, with big jumbo checks and get all the publicity for what their money is buying their programs. So I'm not going to be naive and act like that hasn't been happening for a long, long time. It's just being done in the open now. And the NCAA has effectively painted themselves in a corner from a legal standpoint, simply because they have invested so much in enforcing and pursuing the definition of amateurism and how that gives them, both antitrust exemptions and just all the controls and the prohibitions that they've been able to place on college athletics. Now that that's blown up in their face, and they are mounting some very serious, very dire legal challenges on multiple fronts right now, that potentially could completely rock the very concept of amateurism. They have, as a legal maneuver, basically ceded control to the conferences, to the schools, and punted that issue entirely. And it's not, I don't think it's unprecedented to have an industry similar to college athletics in a very deregulated state. But that doesn't stop the schools. That still doesn't stop the conferences from implementing best practices. And we've seen that in other instances for years as well, where conferences are free to put in place whatever restrictions, rules, regulations they want to. And that may be where the Big Ten, the ACC, the SEC, takes the lead on that and says, we're going to cool off on this a little bit. You're free to transfer wherever. If you choose to go, stay in conference or stay in your division, then perhaps you have to sit for a year and maybe take away some of the incentives for these schools to start poaching. Because at the end of the day, it's generally an upward migration. Guys are always going to go try to find a better fit, a better home. But it's always going to be more enticing to go to a better team. And for programs like Indiana, it really, really disadvantages you when, you invested a boatload of resources in your scouting and your development and your coaching staff, trying to make the most with what you're able to get. And then, you see those guys in year 3, year 4, decide to pack their bags and take it somewhere else. Those are the years you're supposed to get the highest return on those guys. Those are the years where all that investment's supposed to pay off the most, when you've developed upperclassmen. And it really, really can rock your system when you take guys out of the cycle such as that. So, I circle back, though, at the end of the day, we talk about these organizations. We always forget to mention, though, every single one of them, whether it's the conference, whether it's the NCAA, those are member-led. And, we talk about Mark Emmert or Kevin Warren, Roger Goodell gets the same treatment. Those are just figureheads, and mainly their job is just to stand out front and catch all the flack that would otherwise be directed at their members. But it's still the members making the decisions. So it's totally in the hands of the school if they want to rein this in a little bit, or maybe bend that in a different direction.
Yeah, that was
absolutely
extremely well thought out. That answered so many. I think that takes care of so much. There's really nothing to argue there. It's just a crazy time. I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm not sure if anybody's a soccer fan, but if there became some kind of like 6A, we'll call it, in high school football, Indiana high school football, where you get the 20, 25 biggest teams, and they kind of play by these new adapting rules, and the top players go play there. And then the other schools are not necessarily the B team, but they're not a part of this super league. And it goes back to similar to how it was before the NIL. I think there'll still be a little bit of it, but I could see teams like Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama, probably a lot of schools in the SEC, seeing it. You talk about being in the hands of the schools, seeing it being very beneficial fiscally for them to create this super league, get huge TV contracts, be able to pay players, and it just becomes a mini NFL. I think that, in my opinion, that's where this is going. There's going to become such a big, you kind of hit on it, Chronic, how Indiana is, no one's going to transfer. We're just going to use Indiana as an example, but no one's going to get to year 3 and be like, all right, I'm crushing it, let's go transfer to Indiana. Indiana's going to get guys that aren't playing at their schools. Unfortunately, they're not going to get the Washington State kid that has 8 million yards and then transfers to Alabama. They're not going to be in that conversation. And I just wouldn't be surprised if there became such a big contrast, with, like there pretty much already is, in the top 10 teams to the rest of the country, where there becomes some kind of new league that just operates completely differently, and where maybe players are paid outside of NIL, just something like that, and it becomes more of a segue to the NFL than college football. I think that would be really unfortunate if that happens, but that's where I see all this going.